Welcome to a special chess video. Special because the games we're reviewing here are from when I played in the British Chess Championships of 2023. This is in the Weekenders Soans section, and the rating range for this section is between 1500 to 1750. So that gives you an idea of the sort of guys I had to deal with. Well, I was rated about 1600 at the time, so it was pretty middle of the pack. And what else can I say? There were 5 games in total, and the schedule was Friday night there was 1 game, Saturday there were 2 games, and the other 2 on Sunday. Time control was pretty exhausting. It's 90 minutes plus 30-second increment. So those were some pretty long games that had to be played. I also went there with a group of friends. It was all the way down in Leicester, so we had a room booked and everything. 5 guys in one room. Don't ask us what we were up to at night. Anyway, I think that's enough contextual information. Let's start with the first game. This is against Nigel Collins, and I'm playing as white. So we have a Moscow variation, and this is what I usually play against the Sicilian with d6. So this is just basic stuff right now, and apparently this is a huge mistake. I had a plus 1.5, as the engine says. Usually, the way I usually play is I do c3 before d4, because c3 is just in preparation of d4, but apparently you can just go straight ahead. Why is that? I don't know. I'm not gonna bother trying to find out. But yeah, apparently this is wrong. And over here I decided to trade queens, because I had the idea of pushing the pawn, and Stockfish didn't really like this, because apparently black can just do that and exploit the diagonal. My idea was, well, outpost, and my knight can easily go there, and also if black wants to get rid of this pawn, then the only reasonable way is to do f6, but then I take, and then this pawn is looking super weak as a result. Also, it just blocks the bishop. So that was sort of my idea for the move. And play just continued. So here I wanted to move the knight over to the outpost, but I decided to play a4 first, because I sort of wanted to bait this guy into taking the pawn. So I pushed the pawn, and then I offered him to take it. And the idea is I'm not just giving away a pawn for free. The idea is basically I just want to accomplish the knight maneuver, but with greater effect, because I do win some tempo here. The bishop's under attack, so it has to move, and then knight's also coming in to check the king. So yeah, you can't really stop the check unless you want to give up the bishop. So obviously you want to keep the bishop, so you send it back, and then knight goes in. Can't go to the left because I'm threatening to take over here, so you have to go here. And yeah, this just, I think this just looks very unpleasant for black, because next thing is the bishop's gonna come in and target this pawn. And you could say, well, alright, this is no problem at all, because I can just play b6 to defend the pawn, but in comes knight c4, and, well, this attacks the b pawn, so you can't defend it because I just take on a6 there, so you can't defend with the rook. If you try to push, then my knight's gonna jump in, attack the rook, and then afterwards my next move will be to take the c5 pawn, which protects the knight. So that is also not a good idea, and the best move really is to play knight d5, and then I realized over here that I could take, and then bang, and I win the knight, because it's a fork. So I saw all of that, and I was pretty proud that I calculated quite deeply there with the sacrifice. So because I had calculated this line, I felt that the sacrifice was justified because there's just so many threats, so many different tactics available to me. However, it doesn't really quite work out. For example, black doesn't have to take the knight. Black can do this instead. And I thought that this was not possible because I win the rook at the corner over here. But of course, black has knight c2, which forks my rooks. And if we were to go ahead with this, so knight takes, the correct move for black is not to go directly for the fork, but for bishop to take instead. And this serves as a intermezzo move. And it's an intermezzo move because I don't have time to eliminate the knight and get rid of the fork threat, because bishop can just fall all the way back, and then we have a situation where I have a rook, but then black has two bishops for that rook. And two bishops against a rook is unpleasant for the person with the rook, which is me. So instead of rook takes knight, pawn takes bishop is actually the correct idea, allowing for the fork to happen. Now, the engine wants knight b6, and then the knight has to choose which rook to take. Apparently, knight takes rook on a1 is really bad. If you look at the engine here, it goes up to 2. And the reason for that is because this pawn is not actually hanging, because I have the fork. So a person, if they're not being careful enough, might assume I take the rook over here, I distract this rook, and I get this free pawn. Amazing. But no, doesn't work, unfortunately. Also, you're just sending my rook to the a file where I want it to be on the a file to target this weak pawn, so not really much of a distraction. But if you do take the correct rook, then this is just a draw. Slightly better for white because of this weakness here. White has some play on the left side of the board. But yeah. Another alternative is, as the engine indicates, bishop can take the knight, basically ignoring this hanging c-pawn. So bishop takes knight, I recapture, and the idea is now that the knight's gone, this pawn is left hanging, so bishop takes pawn, and then we have knight takes pawn, and we have +1 over here. However, this pawn is just, we're gonna win it eventually at some point, because right now there's 2 attackers on it, so there's no point in defending it. So the only other alternative is c4. However, in that instance, we win the pawn anyway. It's a lot more tedious, but we can send the knight back, and then rook lift, and then rook takes this way. So the knight falling backwards is in order to prevent direct contact between the rook and the pawn. So that's the idea there. Basically, we just win the pawn eventually anyway, so that equalizes the material, and we just have a drawn game. So that's why the sacrifice is not as good as I intended it to be. But hey, at least the outcomes were draws instead of losses for me, so let's continue. The guy didn't accept the sacrifice, which I was pretty bummed about because I did spend quite a while calculating. I mean, my calculation was obviously lacking because I missed a bunch of alternatives that black could have done, which I see now because I have the engine. So anyway, let's continue. So just my same idea, knight maneuver, and I also pushed a5 in order to just paralyze the b pawn here, because now b5 can just be met with en passant always, and you know, I thought I was doing really well at this point, because it just seems like black has a ton of dark squared weaknesses, as I'm pointing out over here. So at this point, my opponent started playing really, really slowly, and I'm talking like 20 minutes per move or something like that. It's pretty understandable, because my understanding at the time was black's position is not good. Basically, I thought it was like +1 or +1.5 in my favor, and I think my opponent felt the same way, that he was losing by like a point or something. So that's why he switched gears and started playing really slowly and carefully. Apparently, the engine doesn't seem to think so. It even favors black very, very slightly, but yeah, it's quite surprising, really, what the engine says, because this just looks miserable for black. Anyway, so he played under the assumption that he's under a huge threat right now, and he's just playing passively and carefully. Rook there. I played bishop here. Now I know I'm not actually threatening or attacking this pawn in any way, because knight can just take the bishop. But I thought this was fine because basically the knight was black's only active piece. Everything else is pretty useless right now. So I thought I'm trading away black's most active piece, so that has to be a good thing for me. Apparently not. The correct approach apparently was to play knight here, to go here or here, in order to apply pressure to the pawn. And I did not see that. I should have. It just seems pretty obvious, but eh. Anyway. So I think it was around this point, because like a couple moves have been played now, that black's time has run down to about 10 minutes. And at this point, he offered a draw. And like I said, I thought initially that this was winning for me by like a point, but I had a lot of time to think, because this guy really took his time, and I used all that time to think of, just a winning plan or a strategy, but I couldn't come up with anything really. So I was beginning to think that this was a draw as well. So I was considering it, but then I looked at the time, and like this dude has 10 minutes left and I have like around 40 or 50. So I thought, well, let's keep playing on and just try to win by time. So that's what I did. I refused to draw and we kept playing. And I made a really bad mistake over here. My idea was just to get the king to e2 where it's more active, because it's the endgame after all. And well, this is bad because my knight is just gonna get pinned, and I don't have a good way of dealing with the pin besides b3, which I played. And I thought this was just over for me, because rook can come in and then just target all of these pawns, and I'm just lost. Apparently it's not as simple as that, because as the engine says, it's minus 0.7, not minus 2 or something significant like that. Apparently I have some ways to complicate things, but I don't think I would have found those complicated lines in order to keep the game going. If he had played rook d1, I think I would have been completely screwed. But thankfully he did not. So instead this happened, and I just got my king to e2 as I had originally intended. Now, over here I played rook d3, which is not good as well, and that's because he wants to zigzag his bishop all the way over here in order to target the weak a pawn, which I just completely missed. I just assumed that this bishop is going to be useless because it's blocked on all ends. I didn't realize, of course, the rook could move and make way for the bishop to park on d8, where it can be useful. It just completely slipped my mind, and I helped him accomplish that goal. I traded rooks, and then now the bishop just conveniently lands on d8, and this pawn is just gone. I can't defend it at all. I should also mention that, like I said, a couple moves ago, this guy only had 10 minutes left, like around this point, and after all of these moves were played, he was already fluctuating between 0 and 30 seconds. He'd take 30 seconds, play a move right before he loses on time, and then that cycle just continues again and again and again. So that's his time situation here. And upon realizing that, I thought, well, even if I lose a pawn, I still should win on time, right? Because this guy is just hovering between 0 and 30 seconds. He's gonna eventually crack under the pressure. So I calmed down a bit and I started thinking a bit more. And I ended up finding the only move. Well, it's not really that hard to find. It's knight d2. As you can see, Stockfish says that this is the only drawing move. And that's because I'm trying to get my knight to e4, where it can attack this pawn over here. And now we have to ask, why is the attack on the c pawn significant? Because black can obviously defend it in two different ways. So let's explore those possibilities. We have b6 first, and I realized that this just traps the bishop. The bishop can't go anywhere, the bishop is in jail. Black can, however, get his bishop out of jail, but to do that, he would have to push the b-pawn and then retreat his bishop. And pushing the b-pawn means that I can trade and then capture on c5, which basically just lets me equalize the material again. And then the position is just an easy draw after that. So b6 is not good, because it locks the bishop in, and the other option is bishop b6, in which case I thought I had knight d6, which attacks this pawn, which is undefended as a result of the bishop retreating backwards, because it blocks the movement of the pawn, which means that I can just grab it next turn. However, that's not the move I played. This was my initial idea, but upon further thought I decided on f4 instead. Now what am I doing here? Can't black just play bishop a7 and then knight d6 doesn't work anymore because black can just push the pawn this time? Well, he could, but I had cooked up knight c8, and this attacks the bishop has to move, and then I get the pawn that way. Now f4 was important because that prevents black from capturing this e-pawn over here. So I had thought that far ahead, pushing the f-pawn in order to make sure that this guy over here is not hanging. So that was my idea, and my opponent saw through it, so he just moved his king. And then I took the pawn, and well, we reached this position over here, and I made a huge mistake, as you can see. This is just a simple case of assigning which piece should supervise which side of the board, and I chose wrong. My idea was for the knight to supervise the left side of the board and the king to supervise the right side of the board. However, that was the incorrect piece assignment. I should have had it the other way around instead. So the knight is supposed to go here, and the king is supposed to cycle back there to prevent this pawn from promoting. And if I had done that, I might have stood a chance, because the position is plus 1 even. So if I had played correctly, I would have had a chance in this otherwise drawish endgame, but I did not, and I played knight b5 instead. Now let me try to describe what happened, because I only have the records to this game up to this point, because my notes for the parts of the game after this were horrendous. They were just like moves in the wrong order, moves that were just straight out missing, and I can't solve the puzzle and fit everything back together, and I can't remember the position as well, because it's been quite a while. But I'll try to do my best to describe what happened. And what happened was, I lost. Now, this was really unfortunate. What happened was, the game simplified further. We eventually reached a point where the best move for me would have resulted in a threefold repetition, which I don't want because I was just being super stubborn. I really wanted to win because this guy has been fluctuating between 0 and 30 seconds for like 20 moves now, and I just wanted to keep playing, hoping for the slight chance that he would eventually crack under pressure. In trying to avoid the threefold repetition, I played the second best move instead, which I had thought would still result in a draw, but I was wrong. So I moved my knight in such a way that the king was able to infiltrate, because I created the hole by moving the knight away, and the king could just sneak in. He took all my pawns, promoted, and I lost. So that was a really depressing outcome for me. So what's the moral here? Because I don't want people to suffer the same fate I did. Don't be stubborn. I mean, this guy has proved his point many times over and over again. He's played like 20, 30 moves with only 30 seconds on his clock, and if he's managed to sustain the time pressure for that long, then he can keep going for another hour or two if things would have went that way. And well, if he's proved his point already, then there's no hope in continuing for a win by the clock. And I did want to take a draw. I did consider it at the very end. I just thought, alright, 10 more moves and then I'll reach my hand out, shake for a draw. And unfortunately, within those 10 moves that I had set myself, the limit that I set myself, I made this mistake. So, really terrible. I'm definitely going to not be so stubborn next time and take a draw when I need to take a draw, not underestimate my opponents as well. Those were some nice, kind words I said, so allow me to balance things out with something evil. I did have an intrusive thought at one point. A voice came to my head. Wilson, look, this guy, he's proved his point. He can handle the time pressure, but that doesn't mean that you should give up. You see, how many times has this gentleman went to the bathroom? Once. Only once within these 3-4 hours that we've been playing. You see where I'm going with this? Change the playing field. This is no longer a battle of wits. This is a battle of piss holding. Give this old man two choices. Either go to the toilet and lose on time, or make him piss his pants. And wow, I thought, what a genius idea. Too bad I'm not a psychopath. So anyways, I took the L. It's not a great start. It was extra depressing as well, because everyone else, my friends that I came with, they all scored a win. Apart from me, of course. So that's it. That was the conclusion to my first game. I'll try to release the videos for the other 4 games shortly. So stay tuned for that. Goodbye.